The morning light stretched gently across the coastline of San Esteban, a small fishing village tucked along the shores of the Philippines. The sea was calm, reflecting shades of rose and silver, while the world still yawned in sleep. She was 12, quiet, slender, and full of something most couldn't see. Her voice, but it carried a kind of honesty that could make the air itself stop and listen. Every morning before the market woke, she helped her mother, Rosa, spread dried fish on bamboo racks by the beach. Their hands worked in silence, one pair rough and tired, the other soft and small. Yet beneath that stillness lived something invisible, a shared hope neither dared to say aloud. Music was Althea's escape. It was how she spoke to the world without words. When the tide was low, she sang to the sea. When it rained, she sang to the wind. Her songs were her secrets, the pieces of her life that poverty couldn't take away. Her mother would often glance at her, smiling quietly, though worrying never left her eyes. She had seen dreams fade to many times in this village, bright, innocent dreams drowned by the weight of survival. But every time Althea sang, Rosa felt something shift in her heart. It was as if her daughter's voice carried light into their little world of struggle. Most villagers didn't notice. To them, Althea was just another poor girl by the shore. But there was something the world hadn't realized yet. Sometimes the most powerful voices rise from the most ordinary places. And as her song floated into the sunrise that morning, a question echoed silently across the waves. How can one small voice, unheard, unseen, unknown, travel far enough to move the hearts of millions? Because soon, that same barefoot girl from the sea would stand on a stage so bright, even the stars would seem to dim. In the heart of the Philippines, in a village where houses leaned close to the ocean, lived a 12-year-old girl named Althea Cruz. Her world was small, a wooden hut that creaked in the wind, a stretch of golden sand that felt like home, and the sea that never stopped singing to her. Althea was a quiet child. She didn't talk much, but her eyes held stories, deep, wondering, and soft, like the tide at dusk. Her laughter was rare, but when it came, it sounded like music, light and fleeting. She had learned early that happiness in their world came in tiny pieces: a dry roof during rain, a full meal after a long day, a kind word from her mother. Her mother, Rosa, sold dried fish at the local market. It wasn't enough, but it kept them alive. Althea often helped her, waking before sunrise, carrying baskets heavier than her small frame could bear. She never complained. Instead, she would hum songs to distract herself from the ache in her shoulders. That was her habit, turning pain into melody, sadness into sound. At school, she was quiet, often sitting alone near the window. She wasn't the best student, but she was observant. She noticed the way wind made palm leaves sway, how sunlight danced on the floor. She often wrote little poems in the corners of her notebooks, lines that no one ever read. At night, she sang softly to herself before sleeping. Her voice filled their small hut, wrapping around her mother like a gentle lullaby. In those moments, Rosa believed that her daughter's gift was something divine, something that could carry them beyond hunger, beyond struggle, beyond everything this small world had ever offered. But Althea didn't dream of fame or riches. She only dreamed of being heard, just once, by someone who would truly listen. Because sometimes the loneliest thing in the world isn't silence. It's having a voice no one notices. No one else had truly listened. Not the children who laughed as they played nearby. Not the neighbors who passed by their hut, too busy to notice the melody floating from within. Her mother heard, of course, she always did. But Rosa's ears were filled with worrying, her hands too tired to clap for dreams when they were busy fighting hunger. Althea felt it, the loneliness that comes from being unseen. She carried it quietly, like a shadow that followed her everywhere. Sometimes at night, when she finished helping her mother, she would walk to the water's edge and sing softly, watching her reflection break into ripples. It made her wonder, maybe dreams were just like that reflection. Beautiful but fragile, disappearing when you tried to hold them. The village had its own rhythm, and dreams like hers didn't fit into it. Here, people measured worth by how hard you worked, not by how beautifully you could sing, and so, she learned to hide her gift, to keep her voice tucked inside her chest, safe but unseen. Then came the storm. One violent night, the wind tore through San Esteban, breaking boats, flooding homes, and leaving salt water where the market once stood. Their hut was nearly washed away. Rosa lost most of her fish stock, everything they depended on. In the days that followed, silence grew heavier. Rosa's hands trembled as she counted the few coins left. Althea watched, helpless, guilt pressing into her heart. She wished she could do something, anything to help. But what could a small voice do against hunger? That week, a neighbor mentioned auditions for The Voice Kids Philippines. It sounded like an impossible world, bright lights, cameras, fame. But something stirred in Althea's heart. Maybe this was her chance to turn her voice, her only gift, into something that could save them. Yet the thought scared her, and for the first time, she wasn't too sure if she was brave enough to sing where the world could finally hear her. The morning of the auditions arrived with the sky the color of steel. Althea had barely slept. Her heart raced, caught between fear and hope, to feelings that felt almost the same. Rosa stood beside her, clutching a small paper bag that held rice cakes and a borrowed pair of shoes. It was all they had to bring, but to them, it felt like everything. The city was overwhelming. Tall buildings reached into the clouds, and the air buzzed with voices, laughter, and dreams colliding in the heat. Althea had never seen so many children her age dressed in glitter, holding microphones, practicing in corners. She felt small, painfully small, like a seashell washed too far from home. When her number was called, she stepped into the audition room. The lights were blinding, the stage enormous. The judges looked at her with polite curiosity, maybe even doubt. She felt it, the weight of their expectations, the quiet judgment of her plain dress, her trembling hands. Then the music began. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. But when she finally opened her mouth, her fear melted into something else, something ancient and pure. Her voice rose gently at first, like a whisper across the sea, then stronger, filled with every dream she'd ever buried. Each note carried her story, the hunger, the salt, the hope of her mother's eyes. The audience grew still, even the judges stopped writing. One by one, their expressions changed, from skepticism to awe, from distance to tears. Then a chair turned, then another and another. When the final note faded, Althea stood frozen. The world had gone silent again, but this time it was the kind of silence that follows something holy. In that moment, she realized something she would never forget. Her voice wasn't just hers. It belonged to every child who had ever been unseen, unheard, and underestimated. That was the day Althea Cruz, the little girl from the sea, finally learned what her voice was meant to do. It wasn't made for applause, it was made to heal. After that life-changing audition, Althea's world began to spin faster than she could hold on to. The lights, the cameras, the interviews, they came like waves crashing one after another. For the first time in her life, people knew her name. But behind every smile she gave on stage was a small, quiet fear she never showed. Fame had a strange weight. It was beautiful, but heavy. She was still the same girl who once sang to the sea, but now there were expectations, people waiting for her to be perfect. Every rehearsal brought new pressure, every mistake felt louder than her voice.
The story of Elias and Meera began far away from bright stages and roaring crowds. In a quiet coastal town where mornings smelled of salt, and nights echoed with the soft hum of lonely waves. Life there moved slowly, gently, almost as if the world had forgotten to rush. Elias, at 17, carried the calm strength of someone who learned responsibility too early. He had steady hands, a patient heart, and a voice that felt like sunrise, warm, hopeful, quietly powerful. Meera, only 15, was the softer one. Her laughter was light, her presence gentle, and her voice held a tenderness that made people pause without knowing why. Their home stood near the shoreline, built from old wood that had survived too many storms. The roof leaked during heavy rains, and the windows rattled when the wind grew wild, but inside lived a warmth that poverty could never dim. Their mother worked long hours at a small food stall, often returning home with tired shoulders yet a smile just strong enough to keep her children believing tomorrow would be kinder. Music became their refuge. Old speakers that crackled, a second-hand guitar missing a string, and a broken microphone found in a junk shop were all they had. But somehow, these imperfect pieces created a world where dreams felt possible. Every night, when the town fell into its quiet rhythm, the siblings would sit by the window overlooking the dark sea, letting their harmonies rise and blend with the sound of the waves. They never spoke about fame. They never imagined stages bigger than the small community hall where they occasionally performed during town events. For them, singing wasn't a hope for escape, it was a way to feel whole, a way to heal wounds too deep for words. And yet, hidden within their simple melodies was something the world had not heard in a long time. Something pure. Something raw. Something that carried the weight of struggle and the softness of love. They didn't know it yet, but the world was quietly moving toward them. One small act of fate at a time. Life has a way of changing direction in the most unexpected moments. For Elias and Meera, that moment arrived on a warm, quiet afternoon when the tide was low and the world felt still. They were sitting on the old stone steps near the shore, sharing a soft melody that floated gently over the water. Elias strummed his worn guitar, its missing string barely noticeable in the way he played it with such care. Meera's voice layered over his, delicate yet full of emotion, like a whisper carrying years of silent stories. Not far away, a tourist who had been wandering the beach paused. He stood perfectly still, captivated by the sound, by the raw beauty of two young siblings singing as if the world wasn't heavy on their shoulders. He recorded them on his phone, not knowing that he was capturing a moment that would stretch far beyond that quiet coastline. The video traveled faster than they could ever imagine. First, it reached a handful of strangers. Then, thousands. Within days, it echoed across the internet, reaching people who didn't understand the language but understood the emotion. Music needed no translation. Somewhere in the endless scroll of social media, a casting assistant for America's Got Talent stopped at their video. There was something in their voices, an honesty, a purity, that felt rare. An email was sent. An invitation was offered. When their mother read the message, her hands trembled. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization that life had just opened a door she never dared to imagine for her children. Tears softly gathered in her eyes, reflecting both the heaviness of the past and the fragile brightness of what could come next. The siblings prepared quietly. They didn't have expensive clothes or perfect instruments. But they had hope, and a kind of courage born from survival. When they boarded the plane to America, the world felt impossibly big. The clouds outside the window looked like mountains of light, and for the first time, Elias and Meera felt the weight of their dreams lifting. They were no longer just two voices from a forgotten coastline. They were two hearts heading toward a destiny waiting patiently under the glow of a distant stage. The moment Elias and Meera stepped into the AGT arena, the world they knew felt like a memory. Bright lights glowed from every corner, casting long reflections on the polished stage floor. The air inside was cold, crisp, and filled with a quiet hum of anticipation, like the breath the world takes just before something extraordinary happens. Backstage, they stood close to each other, listening to the muffled roar of an audience they could not yet see. Elias could feel his heartbeat echoing in his chest, steady but strong, as if reminding him that he belonged here despite the fear pressing against his ribs. Meera, smaller and softer, kept adjusting the edge of her simple dress, trying to calm the nervous trembling in her hands. Everything felt larger than life, the towering stage curtains, the long corridor of lights, the distant voices of host and crew. For a moment, they wondered if they were too small for a world this big. But then they remembered the endless nights singing by the sea, the storms they survived, the quiet strength their mother carried. Their courage was not loud, but it was deep. When they were finally called to step on stage, the atmosphere shifted. The massive theater opened before them like an ocean of faces, thousands of people watching, waiting, judging, hoping. The judges sat in a glowing line, their expressions calm but curious. And there, at the center, was Simon Cowell, arms crossed, eyes fixed, unreadable. The siblings took their place under the spotlight. The warmth of the light wrapped around them, softening their fear just enough to breathe. Elias lifted his old guitar, its wood worn but familiar like a friend who never left. Meera took a gentle breath, grounding herself in the rhythm of her brother's presence. Then, the first note emerged, quiet, uncertain, but beautifully sincere. Their voices followed, blending effortlessly, rising like two threads of light weaving through the silence of the vast arena. The audience stilled. The judges froze. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. In that moment, Elias and Meera were no longer two teenagers from a small coastal town. They were two souls opening their hearts to the world. And the world, stunned and silent, was listening. As the final note of their song drifted into the air, a deep stillness settled over the entire arena. It was the kind of silence that didn't come from emptiness, but from overwhelming emotion. The kind of silence that follows something pure, fragile, and unforgettable. Elias stood with his guitar held close, breath trembling in his chest. Meera's hands were clasped together, her eyes shining with the delicate glow of someone who poured her heart into a moment she wasn't sure the world would understand. They exchanged a small glance, uncertain, hopeful, quietly terrified. The arena remained frozen. The audience didn't clap at first, they simply stared, stunned, as if trying to process what had just unfolded. Two young siblings, simple, humble, unknown, had filled the entire theater with a kind of magic that didn't need volume, lights, or spectacle. It needed only truth. And then, slowly, something shifted. Simon Cowell leaned back in his chair, his expression no longer guarded or unreadable. There was a softness in his eyes, rare, genuine. As if he had just witnessed something he knew would stay with him long after the cameras turned off. The audience began to rise. First a few. Then an entire wave of people, standing as if pulled upward by something bigger than applause. Hands lifted. Tears appeared. Every corner of the arena was filled with the weight of emotion. Simon stood. The moment he rose, a ripple of shock moved through the crowd. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost reverent. Elias and Meera watched him, their breathing fading into the overwhelming quiet. Then, without a word, Simon reached forward. His hand pressed the golden buzzer. A burst of brilliant gold exploded above them. A storm of shimmering confetti cascading from the ceiling like a waterfall of dreams finally finding their way home. The lights warmed their faces, turning tears into sparkles, turning fear into joy. Meera covered her face as emotion overtook her. Elias stood frozen, unable to move, unable to believe that the world's most unlikely moment was now their reality. Their mother rushed onto the stage, pulling them into her arms as the golden rain continued to fall around them. In that single, breathtaking moment, the world didn't feel divided by distance, language, or borders. It felt connected. Through two voices born from struggle, courage, and love. They had come from silence. But now, the world itself was applauding them. The days that followed their golden buzzer moment felt dreamlike, almost unreal. Elias and Meera woke up each morning in their small hotel room in Los Angeles, unsure if the world they were living in was truly theirs. But every time they turned on the TV, every time they opened their phones, they saw the same thing. Millions of people watching their performance, sharing it, crying to it, celebrating it. Their story had reached the world. Not because of fame, or glamour, or perfect training. But because two young hearts from a distant coastline had sung with a sincerity the world rarely sees. Interviews came. Messages flooded in from every corner of the globe. People wrote about how the siblings' voices reminded them of home, of loss, of love, of memories they thought they had forgotten. Elias and Meera realized that music wasn't just something they did. It was something they gave. Yet, even as attention grew, they stayed grounded. They carried with them the quiet strength of their mother, the soft roar of the waves from their hometown, and the humility shaped by years of struggle. Fame did not change them. It simply widened the space where their kindness could reach. When they finally returned to the Philippines, the coastal town that once felt small now felt full of life. Children ran to them with excitement. Neighbors cheered. Their home, old, weathered, imperfect, felt warmer than ever. But Elias and Meera wanted their journey to mean something more than applause. They decided to rebuild the abandoned community music room near the shoreline. With help from supporters and new friends, they turned it into a bright, welcoming space filled with instruments, books, and a stage for young dreamers. They watched local children pick up guitars, sing timidly, and slowly discover the courage that once bloomed in their own hearts. They saw futures being shaped, little by little, note by note. Their AGT moment became more than a performance. It became a beginning. A reminder that greatness can rise from places the world overlooks. A reminder that voices born from hardship can still carry hope. And in the gentle breeze of their hometown, Elias and Meera realized something simple yet profound. They had once dreamed of reaching the world. Now, they dreamed of lifting it.